The whispers followed me even in my dreams, a constant reminder of the day my life imploded. The courtroom air was thick with the stench of malice and victory. Their victory. I could still feel the sting of humiliation as the judge's gavel slammed down, sealing my fate. They had orchestrated it all, meticulously dismantling my career, my reputation, my very existence. They thought they had crushed me, buried me so deep that I could never claw my way back to the surface. If you have a sister who you would defend with your life, subscribe now. My name is Ava, and until recently, I was a rising star in the cutthroat world of corporate law. I'd spent years climbing the ladder, sacrificing everything for success. Long hours, missed birthdays, and strained relationships were all collateral damage in my relentless pursuit of partnership. I believed I was building something solid, a legacy that would make my family proud. I was wrong. Naive, even. I had this associate, Mark, whom I'd mentored, practically pulled up the ranks alongside me. He was my protege, my confidant, the one person I genuinely trusted within the firm. We were a team, inseparable and seemingly unstoppable. That's what made their betrayal so exquisitely painful. It wasn't just a professional setback, it was a deeply personal wound. The trouble began subtly, almost imperceptibly. Missed deadlines, misplaced documents, and a general air of incompetence started plaguing my projects. At first, I attributed it to stress, to the increasing pressure of my workload. But then whispers started circulating, hushed conversations that ceased abruptly when I entered the room. I felt a growing unease, a prickling sensation that something was terribly wrong. One evening, I stayed late to catch up on paperwork, determined to get to the bottom of the recent string of failures. I overheard Mark speaking on the phone in a hushed tone, his words laced with venom. He was talking to my parents. That was the first shock. The second was the content of the conversation. They were plotting to undermine me, to sabotage my career and destroy my reputation. They had hired a lawyer, a ruthless shark known for his aggressive tactics, to bankrupt me. Their motive? They believed I was becoming too successful, too independent, too different from the daughter they had envisioned. They wanted to control me, to force me back into the mold they had created for me. The person I trusted most was one of them. The revelation hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. My world tilted on its axis, and suddenly, everything I thought I knew was a lie. That night, sleep evaded me. My mind raced, replaying every interaction with Mark, searching for clues I had missed, red flags I had ignored. Each memory now seemed tainted, poisoned by the knowledge of his treachery. The weight of their betrayal pressed down on me, suffocating me with its intensity. I tried to confront Mark, to understand why he would do this to me, but he denied everything, his eyes cold and devoid of any remorse. He gaslit me, claiming I was paranoid, delusional, that the stress was getting to me. He twisted the knife, playing the concerned friend, further isolating me from my colleagues. My performance at work plummeted. I couldn't focus, couldn't trust anyone. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I felt like I was drowning in a sea of doubt and suspicion. Projects I had poured my heart and soul into began to unravel. Deadlines were missed, and clients started complaining. The partners at the firm, who had once lauded me as their golden girl, now regarded me with thinly veiled disappointment. I tried to explain, to defend myself against the accusations of incompetence, but my words fell on deaf ears. They had already made up their minds. Desperate, I sought legal counsel, hoping to find a way to protect myself from my parents' onslaught. But the lawyer I consulted painted a grim picture. My parents had considerable resources, and their lawyer was known for his ruthless efficiency. He advised me to settle, to salvage what I could and walk away before they completely destroyed me. But I refused. I couldn't let them win. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to simply surrender. I decided to fight back, to expose their lies and reclaim my life. I started gathering evidence, meticulously documenting every instance of sabotage, every false accusation. It was a painstaking process, fraught with risk. Mark was always watching, always listening, ready to report any suspicious activity. I had to be careful, methodical, and above all, patient. The stress took its toll. I lost weight, My skin became pale and dark circles formed under my eyes. I was a shadow of my former self, consumed by anger and a burning desire for revenge. I remember one particularly brutal day after a disastrous meeting with a major client. I was called into the senior partner's office and dressed down for my poor performance. He hinted that my position at the firm was no longer secure, that I was becoming a liability. As I walked out of his office, defeated and humiliated, I saw Mark smirking at me. That was the breaking point. In that moment, I knew I couldn't continue down this path. I had to change my strategy, to find a way to turn the tables on them. They thought they had broken me, but they were wrong. They had only ignited a fire within me, a fire that would consume them all.
I began to act the part of the defeated woman, the broken victim. I apologized for my mistakes, expressed remorse for my shortcomings, and promised to do better. I even started attending family dinners again, pretending that everything was normal. They lapped it up, convinced that they had finally broken my spirit. But beneath the surface, I was quietly plotting my revenge. I started to observe them closely, to study their habits, their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities. I discovered that Mark was deeply in debt, gambling away his money at underground casinos. My parents, for all their outward respectability, were engaged in some shady financial dealings, skimming money from their charitable foundation. I realized that they were not as untouchable as they believed themselves to be. They had secrets, and I was determined to expose them. I started to gather information, using my legal skills to uncover their hidden assets and questionable transactions. I enlisted the help of a private investigator, a former colleague who had left the firm on bad terms and harbored his own grudge against my parents. Together, we pieced together a damning case against them, a web of deceit and corruption that would bring them crashing down. The more I uncovered, the more determined I became to make them pay for what they had done to me. Their arrogance had blinded them. They never suspected that I was playing them, that I was quietly building a case against them while they celebrated their victory. They thought they were untouchable, but they were about to learn that no one is above the law, and no one can escape the consequences of their actions. My silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. They had mistaken my calm for submission. It was their final, fatal mistake. The abyss was a cold, dark place. I remember wandering the streets aimlessly, the city lights blurring into streaks of meaningless color. My bank account was dwindling, my reputation in tatters, and my spirit crushed. The firm had officially let me go, citing irreconcilable differences and offering a meager severance package that barely covered my legal fees. I was alone, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. I found myself standing on a bridge, staring into the murky water below. The wind whipped around me, carrying the sounds of the city, a cacophony of indifference. For a moment, I considered just letting go, of surrendering to the darkness that threatened to consume me. The thought was fleeting, but the fact that it had even crossed my mind shook me to my core. I was better than this. They hadn't just taken my job or my reputation, they were trying to take my life, and I refused to let them win. That night, huddled in my tiny apartment, I made a decision. I would not be a victim. I would not let them define me. I would rise from the ashes and exact my revenge. The warmth of the radiator was failing to fight the chill of the room, and a shiver ran down my spine, but it wasn't from the cold. It was a different feeling altogether. I spent the next few weeks immersed in research. I devoured legal documents, financial statements, and anything else that could give me an edge. I learned about shell corporations, offshore accounts, and the intricate web of deceit that my parents and Mark had constructed. The more I learned, the angrier I became. Their arrogance, their greed, their willingness to destroy me for their own selfish gain fueled my resolve. Sleep became a luxury. Food was an afterthought. My entire existence revolved around one thing: revenge. I started documenting everything, meticulously recording every conversation, every transaction, every lie. I knew that evidence was key, that I needed to build an airtight case that would withstand their legal onslaught. I invested in surveillance equipment, hidden cameras, and voice recorders, turning my apartment into a makeshift command center.
I became a ghost, moving silently through the shadows, observing their every move. They noticed the change in me, the quiet intensity that replaced my former vulnerability. They seemed wary, unsure of what I was planning, but they underestimated me, believing that I was still too broken, too defeated to pose any real threat. One evening, I followed Mark to an underground poker game, a high-stakes affair frequented by shady characters and notorious gamblers. I watched as he lost thousands of dollars, his face contorted with desperation. He was drowning in debt, borrowing money from dangerous people who would not hesitate to use violence to collect. This was his weakness, his Achilles heel. I knew I could exploit it. I began feeding him information, subtly guiding him towards even riskier ventures, knowing that he would eventually self-destruct. I also discovered that my parents were planning to sell their charitable foundation, pocketing the profits and leaving the beneficiaries high and dry. This was the final straw. They had crossed a line, betraying the trust of those who depended on them most. I knew I had to act quickly, to expose their crimes before they could do any more damage. The weight on my chest was almost unbearable. It was time. I contacted a journalist, a seasoned reporter known for his investigative prowess and his unwavering commitment to the truth. I presented him with my evidence, a meticulously compiled dossier that detailed my parents' financial crimes and Mark's gambling debts. He was skeptical at first, but as he delved deeper into the documents, he became convinced. He agreed to publish the story, knowing that it would be explosive, that it would shake the foundations of the city's elite. The day the article was published, all hell broke loose. The phones at my parents' mansion rang nonstop, reporters clamoring for a comment. Mark's creditors came calling, their threats growing increasingly violent. The charitable foundation was raided by federal agents, their offices sealed off and their assets frozen.
They were caught in a trap of their own making. I watched it all unfold from my apartment, a sense of cold satisfaction washing over me. It wasn't over yet, but the game had changed. They had tried to bury me, but they had only succeeded in planting the seeds of their own destruction. The city outside was loud with sirens, but inside, all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing. Steady, calm, focused. This was just the beginning. The news articles were like gasoline on a fire. I knew the initial shock would fade, so I had to keep the pressure on. My apartment, now a fortress of technology, hummed with the quiet thrum of servers and the soft glow of monitors. Every wall seemed to sprout another camera. Every vent concealed a microphone. I was documenting everything, building a digital fortress of evidence. I smiled. I played their game, attending those strained family dinners, listening to their empty platitudes, all while recording every word, every gesture. I even feigned remorse, apologizing for my erratic behavior, promising to seek help for my emotional issues. They ate it up, their eyes gleaming with smug satisfaction. They believed they had won, that I was broken beyond repair. Little did they know, I was simply gathering ammunition. One evening, during one of these excruciating dinners, my father made a careless remark about burying the evidence related to the foundation's funds. My heart leaped. He was talking about documents, physical documents, not just digital records. I knew I had to find them. That night, while they slept, I slipped into their mansion, navigating the darkened hallways with the stealth of a seasoned operative. I disabled the alarm system, a skill I had acquired during my research, and made my way to my father's study. The room was a shrine to his ego, filled with expensive artwork and leather-bound books. I bypassed the sophisticated security system guarding his computer, tracing the wiring to a hidden panel behind a bookshelf. Inside, I found a safe, its steel door glinting in the dim light. Cracking the combination took longer than expected, my fingers slick with sweat, but finally, with a soft click, the door swung open. Inside, nestled among stacks of cash and valuable jewelry, were the documents I was looking for, detailed records of the foundation's fraudulent activities, signed affidavits, and incriminating emails. I photographed everything, meticulously documenting each piece of evidence. As I was about to leave, I noticed a small velvet box tucked away in the corner. Curiosity piqued. I opened it. Inside was a diamond necklace, the one my mother had claimed was lost years ago. I knew she had lied, that she had secretly sold it to fund her lavish lifestyle. I pocketed the necklace, a small token of my revenge. Leaving the mansion was the hardest part. The alarm system was offline, but I knew they had external security patrols. I waited in the shadows for almost an hour, listening to the rhythmic footsteps of the guard as he made his rounds. Finally, when the coast was clear, I slipped out, melting back into the night. Back at my apartment, I uploaded the photos to a secure server, ensuring that the evidence was safe and accessible, even if something happened to me. I also made copies of the documents, distributing them to various sources, including the journalist, the authorities, and even some of the foundation's beneficiaries. I wanted to make sure that the truth would come out, no matter what. The next few days were a blur of activity. I continued to play the part of the contrite daughter, attending family events, feigning normalcy, all while secretly gathering more evidence. I discovered that Mark was planning to flee the country, to escape his creditors and start a new life with the money he had stolen from me. I couldn't let him get away. I contacted his bookie, a ruthless man with a reputation for violence, and anonymously tipped him off about Mark's plans. I knew what would happen. I knew that Mark's attempt to leave would be met with swift and brutal consequences. But I didn't care. He had betrayed me. He had tried to destroy me, and he deserved everything that was coming to him. My hands were clean. I didn't arrange anything. I just opened a door, and he walked through it of his own free will. The tension was almost unbearable. I knew that my plan was coming to fruition, that the final act was about to begin. I could feel it in the air, a sense of anticipation, of impending doom. I started to have nightmares, vivid and disturbing visions of my parents and Mark, their faces twisted with rage and hatred. I knew they were getting close, that they were starting to suspect something. Mark, desperate and paranoid, began to follow me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and malice. I could feel his gaze on me, burning into my skin. I knew I had to be careful, that one wrong move could expose everything. One afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, a sense of foreboding washing over me. "We know what you've been up to," a voice hissed on the other end of the line. "You should have stayed quiet. Now you're going to pay." I hung up, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew they were serious. I knew they were capable of anything. I activated the security system in my apartment, locking the doors, arming the alarms, and setting up the surveillance cameras. I was ready. I would not be a victim. I would fight back, no matter the cost. As I sat there, waiting for them to make their move, I couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration. I had played their game, and I had won. The exact day they tried to end me, I exposed the truth. The feeling was delicious. The phone call was the starting gun. I knew they would come for me, and I was ready. My apartment was a web of cameras and microphones, every corner wired, every shadow watched. I deleted all personal files from my computer, transferring them to a secure, encrypted server. I shredded any documents that could be traced back to me, burning the ashes in a metal bin on my balcony. I was erasing myself, becoming a ghost, preparing to disappear, but not before I delivered the final blow. I knew I couldn't rely on the authorities to protect me. They were too powerful, too well connected. I had to take matters into my own hands. I had to expose them in a way that would leave no room for doubt, no possibility of escape. I thought of Mark's gambling debts, my parents' theft from their charity, and smiled. Their greed was my weapon. I decided to lure them into a trap, a carefully orchestrated confrontation that would expose their crimes to the world. I sent an anonymous email to the journalist who had published the first story, promising him exclusive access to new evidence, proof that would finally bring them down. I told him to meet me at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a desolate location far from prying eyes. I knew they would be watching his email, that they would intercept the message and come to the warehouse themselves, hoping to silence me once and for all. It was a gamble, a dangerous game of cat and mouse, but I was willing to risk everything to see them brought to justice. I packed a bag with essentials, a change of clothes, a burner phone, a weapon. I didn't want to hurt them, but I was prepared to defend myself if necessary. I slipped out of my apartment, moving silently through the shadows, avoiding the main streets, sticking to the back alleys and hidden pathways. I felt like a fugitive, a spy on a secret mission, my heart pounding in my chest with a mixture of fear and excitement. I glanced back once at my building and turned away. There was no turning back now. The warehouse was a crumbling relic of the city's industrial past, a vast cavernous space filled with rusted machinery and broken windows. The air was thick with the smell of decay and neglect. I chose this location for a reason. It was isolated, difficult to access, and easy to control. I had spent the past few days rigging the warehouse with cameras and microphones, turning it into a giant surveillance trap. I had also planted evidence, carefully placed documents and recordings that would expose their crimes to anyone who entered.
I waited in the darkness, listening to the wind whistling through the broken windows, the sound of rats scurrying in the shadows. The anticipation was almost unbearable. I knew they would be here soon. The journalist arrived first, his face pale with apprehension. He was a good man, driven by a desire to expose the truth, but he was also naive, unaware of the danger he was in.
I quickly explained the situation, telling him that my parents and Mark were likely on their way, that they would stop at nothing to silence us. I showed him the cameras, the microphones, the evidence I had planted. I told him that our only chance was to expose them, to broadcast their crimes to the world. He nodded, his eyes filled with determination. He agreed to help me, to risk his life for the truth. We waited in silence, watching the monitors, listening to the sounds of the city. The journalist was visibly nervous, his hands trembling, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I tried to reassure him, telling him that everything would be all right, that we were in control. But deep down, I was just as scared as he was. I knew that this was it, the final confrontation, the moment of truth. There was no turning back. The headlights appeared in the distance, 2 sets of bright beams cutting through the darkness. I felt a surge of adrenaline, my senses sharpening, my mind racing. They were here. They had taken the bait. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was about to happen. It was time. The cars screeched to a halt outside the warehouse. The doors opened, and my parents and Mark emerged, their faces grim, their eyes filled with rage. They were not alone. They were accompanied by 2 men, large and imposing, their faces hidden beneath the shadows of their baseball caps. Bodyguards. They meant business. My parents and Mark stalked towards the warehouse entrance, their footsteps echoing in the darkness. I could hear their voices, low and menacing, filled with hatred and contempt. I watched them on the monitors, my heart pounding in my chest, my finger hovering over the trigger. It was time to unleash my carefully crafted plan. My father spoke first, his voice dripping with venom. "Where is she?" he snarled. "Where is that ungrateful little—" Mark cut him off, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "She's here," he said. "I can feel it." My mother stepped forward, her face contorted with rage. "She's going to pay for what she's done," she hissed. "She's going to regret ever crossing us." The bodyguards remained silent, their eyes scanning the warehouse, their hands resting on their weapons. They were professionals, cold and calculating, ready to do whatever was necessary to protect their employers. My parents and Mark advanced into the warehouse, their eyes searching the darkness, their voices echoing in the vast empty space. I waited for them to get closer, to move into the center of the trap. I needed them all in the same place, within range of the cameras and microphones. The journalist was beside himself. He was mumbling, shaking. I grabbed his arm. "Not yet," I whispered. "Wait for my signal." I was calm, collected. I had to see this through. I took a deep breath. It was time. "Hello, family," I said, my voice echoing through the warehouse. "Welcome to my little surprise." My voice echoed through the warehouse, bouncing off the corrugated iron walls, each syllable a hammer blow against their carefully constructed reality. Their faces shifted, the anger replaced by a flicker of fear, quickly masked by a veneer of disbelief. My father sputtered, his face turning an unbecoming shade of purple. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" My mother's eyes narrowed, her gaze flicking around the warehouse, searching for the source of the voice. Mark simply stood there, frozen, his mouth agape like a landed fish. I hit a switch, and the warehouse erupted in light. Floodlights blazed to life, illuminating every corner, every shadow, revealing the cameras and microphones that I had so meticulously placed. On the far wall, a large screen flickered on, displaying live feeds from every camera, showing their every move, their every expression. The journalist gasped, his eyes wide with shock and awe. My parents and Mark recoiled, their faces paling as they realized the extent of my trap. I spoke again, my voice amplified by the warehouse's sound system. "No joke, family, just a reckoning." I began playing the recordings. Snippets of conversations, captured over months, filled the space. My father bragging about his fraudulent schemes, my mother discussing her hidden assets, Mark plotting his escape with my stolen money. The recordings were clear, damning, irrefutable. Their faces crumbled.
The bodyguards shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting around, unsure of what to do. Their employers were no longer in control. The screen then shifted to show the documents, the photographs I had taken from my father's safe, the details of the charitable foundation's fraud, the signed affidavits, the incriminating emails, all laid bare for the world to see. My father roared, lunging towards the screen, but the bodyguards restrained him. My mother sank to her knees, her face buried in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Mark simply stared at the screen, his eyes wide with horror, his face ashen. I played the recording of my father's careless remark about burying the evidence, then showed the photograph of the diamond necklace I had found in his safe, the one my mother had claimed was lost. "Recognize this, Mom?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Or did you forget which lie you told?" Then I played the recording of Mark's phone call with his bookie, revealing his plan to flee the country with my money. A collective gasp filled the warehouse. The journalist started broadcasting live on his phone to expose them and their schemes to the world. I watched, a sense of cold satisfaction washing over me, as their world imploded. My father's face went from purple to white. He collapsed into one of the bodyguard's arms.
Suddenly, Mark saw red. Fueled by desperation, he broke free from the bodyguard, charging towards me, a look of pure hatred on his face. "I'll silence you!" he screamed, his voice cracking with emotion. Before I could react, one of the bodyguards stepped in front of him, delivering a swift and brutal blow to his face. Mark crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The bodyguards looked at my parents, their faces grim. It was over. My father gave a slight nod. They understood. They knew that their lives were about to change forever. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, closer. The authorities were on their way. The journalists continued to broadcast the whole scene, capturing every moment of their downfall. My parents stood there, defeated, their faces etched with despair, their eyes filled with a mixture of hatred, regret, and disbelief. I stepped forward, approaching them, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked at them, my eyes filled with a mixture of anger, pain, and a strange sense of closure. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why did you do this to me?" My father looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and defiance. "We did what we had to do," he said, "to protect ourselves, to protect our family." My mother remained silent, her face buried in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I shook my head, my eyes filled with disgust. "You destroyed our family," I said, "for greed, for power, for yourselves." The authorities arrived, flooding the warehouse with flashing lights and the sound of shouting. My parents and the bodyguards were taken into custody. Mark lay motionless on the floor. The journalist approached me, his face filled with admiration and gratitude. "You did it," he said. "You exposed them. You brought them to justice." I nodded, my eyes fixed on my parents as they were led away in handcuffs. They lost everything. I just smiled. Later, after giving my statement to the police, I walked out of the warehouse into the cool night air. The city was quiet, the sirens silent. I felt exhausted, drained, but also strangely liberated. I had finally faced my demons. I had confronted my betrayers, and I had won. But the victory felt hollow, empty. I realized that revenge wasn't the sweet dish I had imagined. It was bitter, unsatisfying. It didn't bring me happiness. It didn't bring me peace. But it was necessary. It was the only way to protect myself, to reclaim my life, to ensure that they would never hurt anyone again. I will never forgive them for what they did. I will never forget what they put me through. But I can move on. I can start over. I can rebuild my life, stronger and wiser than before. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.